If the invisible walls protecting your job, your industry, or even your entire country were just torn down tomorrow, would you survive?
Oof. That's a pretty brutal question to start with.
Right. But I want you to really sit with that for a second, because we all operate inside these safety nets, whether we realize it or not.
Oh, absolutely. We're surrounded by them.
Yeah, like maybe it's a strict industry regulation that keeps new competitors out of your specific market. Or maybe it's a deeply entrenched company policy that shields your department from being outsourced.
Or even on a macro level, right? Like a massive national tariff that makes foreign goods artificially expensive.
Exactly. So your domestic products look like a bargain by comparison. Now, human intuition tells us that protecting things makes them strong.
Sure, yeah. You build a fortress, pull up the drawbridge, and you stay safe. It's human nature.
But what if the exact opposite is true? What if protection is actually a slow-acting, comfortable poison? And what if genuine, undeniable growth requires a brutal, system-wide detox that feels exactly like a catastrophe while it's happening?
It's a phenomenal question, and you're right to point out how counterintuitive it is. Because look, we are biologically wired to seek shelter.
Of course.
When a local economy struggles, the immediate political, social, and emotional reflex is to throw up walls. We want to protect domestic industries. We want to save local jobs from foreign competition.
Which makes sense. The intention is almost always good.
It is good, but the actual mechanics of how the world works, the underlying mathematics of economic evolution, they reveal a very different, much more unforgiving reality.
Which brings us to the actual evidence, because today's deep dive isn't about theory or, political talking points.
It's definitely not.
We are looking at one of the most highly regarded, rigorously constructed economic studies of the last few decades. It's a 2002 paper by Dartmouth College economist Nina Pavcnik. It's titled Trade Liberalization, Exit, and Productivity Improvements. Evidence from Chilean Plants.
And I know. The phrase econometric study of trade liberalization sounds like the ultimate cure for insomnia.
It really does. But we need to reframe what this document actually is.
Yeah.
Because this isn't just some dusty academic spreadsheet.
Oh, not at all.
We are going to look at the Chilean manufacturing sector over a hyper-specific, super volatile 7-year window from 1979 to 1986.
Right.
I want you to picture a split screen in your mind right now. On the left side, you have a modern, hyper-efficient, booming factory. Lights are on, production lines are humming.
A total machine.
Yeah. And on the right side of the screen, you have a rusted, boarded-up, bankrupt factory with chains on the doors.
A ghost town.
Exactly. And right in the middle, a massive red arrow pointing from the dead factory to a skyrocketing GDP graph. Because this paper is a survival diary, or honestly, better yet, a corporate autopsy report.
I love that framing, an autopsy report.
It is. It's this incredibly rare, unfiltered look at exactly what kills a business and what forces a surviving business to mutate into an absolute monster of efficiency.
And what elevates Pavcnik's work above the standard economic literature, and frankly what makes it so fascinating to read, is her methodology regarding failure.
Right, how she handles the dead companies.
Exactly. For decades, economists would look at a country that opened its borders to free trade, they'd measure the companies that were still standing a decade later, and they'd proudly point to the data and say, look how productive everyone is.
Ta-da, free trade works.
Right. But Pavcnik did something different. She dug up the graves, she rigorously tracked the companies that died.
Which changes everything.
It changes the entire math. And by forcing the data of the dead back into the equation, she illuminated a fundamental mechanic of growth that explains not just the rise and fall of industries, but honestly, the trajectory of individual careers.
Okay, to really grasp the weight of what she found, we can't just look at the aftermath. We have to travel back in time and set the scene.
Let's do it.
So it's the 1970s in Chile, right before this massive economic experiment begins. What did the landscape actually look like for a business owner back then?
Imagine an entire national economy living inside an artificial oxygen tent.
Okay.
For decades before 1974, Chile, like many developing nations at the time, relied heavily on a highly protected, inward-looking development strategy.
Right.
The prevailing economic philosophy was something called import substitution industrialization.
Okay, let's banish the jargon. What does that actually mean for the guy on the street?
Fair enough. The premise is simple. Instead of relying on the rest of the world for manufactured goods, a country should just produce everything it needs domestically. The goal is total self-sufficiency.
Which sounds great on a bumper sticker, right? Made at home for our home.
It sounds incredibly patriotic.
But to actually enforce that, a government has to manipulate the market heavily, right? I mean, you can't just ask people nicely to buy the domestic product if the foreign product is way cheaper or, better quality.
Exactly. You have to force them. And the primary tool for that manipulation is the tariff.
Right. The big wall.
The wall. To make sure Chilean citizens only bought Chilean goods, the government erected massive, massive tariff walls.
How massive are we talking?
Well, we are not talking about a 5 or 10% tax just to give local businesses a slight edge. We are talking about tariff rates that were routinely soaring above 100% across various manufacturing sectors.
Hey, hold on. Let me make sure I'm visualizing the math on a 100% tariff correctly.
Sure.
If I'm a construction company in Santiago and I want to import a heavy-duty tractor from, say, the United States or Germany, the Chilean government is essentially doubling the price of that machine at the border.
Often more than doubling it, yes.
Wow.
If that foreign tractor costs $20,000 to manufacture and ship, the tariff makes it cost $40,000 or more for the Chilean buyer.
That is insane.
It is.
Yeah.
Think about what that does to the ecosystem inside the country. It instantly creates a massive artificial price umbrella for domestic factories.
Oh, I see where this is going. If the foreign tractor is artificially priced at $40,000, the domestic Chilean tractor manufacturer doesn't even have to be efficient to compete.
They barely have to try. A domestic factory could be plagued by incredible inefficiencies.
Right.
They could have bloated middle management, terribly outdated machinery on the factory floor, high rates of material waste, poor quality control, you name it.
All the things that normally kill a business.
Exactly. In a free, open market, a company like that would bleed cash and quickly go bankrupt. But under a 100% tariff, it simply doesn't matter.
Because even with all that waste, they can still undercut the foreign price.
Yes. Because of that compounding inefficiency, they might produce a tractor for, say, $30,000.
And since the better foreign tractor is locked at $40,000, the domestic factory wins the contract anyway. The buyer literally has no other choice.
Precisely. The domestic factory survives. But more dangerously, because they are making sales and turning a profit, the management of that factory actually believes they are thriving.
Oh, that's wild. They think they're geniuses.
Right. They feel successful. They have no idea how fragile they actually are because the tariff wall is absorbing all the feedback the market is trying to give them.
They are completely insulated from reality. It's an incubator for mediocrity.
That's exactly what it is.
The entire manufacturing sector is basically coasting.
Huh.
But then the experiment begins.
Yes, history takes a very sharp turn.
The government changes course, and they decide to open the economy. Now, normally when a government enacts a massive structural shift like this, they phase it in over time, right? To avoid a total shock to the system. Did Chile slowly lower the temperature?
No, they didn't adjust the thermostat, they smashed it.
They smashed.
Completely. Between 1974 and 1979, the Chilean government executed a massive, unprecedented trade liberalization. They didn't just lower those tariffs, they took a sledgehammer to the entire protective wall. They eliminated almost all non-tariff barriers, like strict quotas, and they aggressively slashed those 100% plus tariffs down to a flat, uniform 10% across almost all industries.
Down to 10%, from over 100.
Yes, and they did it entirely by 1979.
Just to pause on the human element of that, that is genuinely terrifying. I mean, you can't just strip away a 100% shield in a few years without causing absolute chaos.
You really can't.
You'd think there would be, I don't know, a 20-year glide path. You give the domestic tractor plant time to buy new machines, retrain their staff, slowly get up to global standards.
That is the usual political compromise, yes. But here, no phase-in, no 20-year glide path. Domestic plants were suddenly, almost instantaneously exposed to the ruthless firepower of global, multinational giants.
The artificial oxygen was just sucked out of the room.
Instantly. Suddenly, that $20,000 foreign tractor only costs $22,000 with the new 10% tariff.
And that domestic factory, the one happily making clunky tractors for $30,000 with their bloated management and outdated machines, they're suddenly staring down the barrel of a gun. Their product is $8,000 more expensive and probably way lower quality. They're mathematically obsolete overnight.
Which brings us to the immediate aftermath. Because when you listen to the most ardent theoretical proponents of free trade, they often paint a very rosy picture.
Right. They talk about innovation and lower prices.
Exactly. They argue that competition immediately breeds innovation, prices drop for consumers, and prosperity just magically follows. But Pavcnik's data forces us to look at the short-term reality of ripping off the bandage.
And that reality is a complete bloodbath.
It is.
Let's look at the actual numbers from the paper because they are staggering. Between 1979 and 1986, which is the specific window of this study, a massive 35% of all active manufacturing plants in Chile went bankrupt.
35%.
Over a third of the factories in the entire country simply ceased to exist. They turned to dust.
And it's vital that we don't just gloss over that statistic as a mere data point on a PowerPoint slide. A 35% plant exit rate translates to an immense human toll.
Definitely.
Because of those closures, 25% of the entire manufacturing workforce in Chile lost their jobs. 1 in 4 workers out on the street.
That is brutal. And if you zoom in on the specific sectors that took the hardest hit, what the paper calls the import competing sectors.
Right.
These are the industries making the exact things that foreigners could suddenly import cheaply, like textiles, apparel, certain chemicals, and machinery. In those specific sectors, the carnage is even worse. 40% of the factories were completely wiped off the map.
40%, almost half of an entire industry just gone.
I mean, imagine driving through a manufacturing town in Chile in their early 1980s. Almost every other factory you pass is boarded up. The parking lots are completely empty. There are chains across the gates.
It would look like a depression.
It really would.
Yeah.
And this data right here, this specific hyper-localized pain, is exactly why politicians today are so terrified of free trade.
Oh, absolutely.
If you are an elected official and you look at these numbers, 35% of businesses dead, a quarter of the workers unemployed, it looks like an utter failure of policy. It looks like the whole system is collapsing in on itself.
Which is exactly why these types of reforms are so rarely carried through to their conclusion. Politicians operate on 2, maybe 4-year election cycles.
Right.
If you enact a policy, and within a few years, a quarter of your manufacturing base is unemployed, the immediate political pressure is insurmountable. You are going to be voted out, the opposing party will campaign on saving jobs, and those tariff walls will be built right back up.
Because the pain is so visible.
Yes. The immediate localized pain of job losses is so loud, so visible, and so concentrated that it entirely drowns out any long-term, dispersed structural changes that might be happening beneath the surface.
Right, because the pain is specific. A worker knows exactly why they lost their job at the tractor plant. But a consumer buying a slightly cheaper, better tractor doesn't, throw a parade for the government.
Exactly. They just enjoy the savings and move on.
The benefits are spread out and quiet. The losses are concentrated and screaming. It reminds me of watching a massive forest fire on the news.
Okay, yeah.
When you see the footage from a helicopter, it just looks like a pure tragedy. The sky is black with smoke. Thousands of acres of trees are reduced to ash. The wildlife is running for its life. Your instinct is that this is entirely destructive.
The forest fire is actually a highly functional analogy here, provided we look at what happens in the years after the fire.
Okay, take me there.
If you only look at the ashes and the smoke, you miss the profound biological reset occurring in the soil. In ecology, a fire clears the dead wood that was blocking the sunlight. It releases nutrients back into the earth. It literally forces certain types of seeds, which have been dormant for decades, to finally crack open and germinate.
Which brings us to the ultimate plot twist in Pavcnik's macro data. This is the part of the paper that makes you stop in your tracks. And it's really the core mystery of this whole deep dive.
It is.
Because despite the massive factory closures, despite the boarded up windows and the 25% unemployment rate, the overall productivity of the Chilean manufacturing sector didn't just recover.
No.
It skyrocketed.
The figures from Table 3 in the study are genuinely remarkable. Over this 7-year period, despite losing a third of the players on the field, the manufacturing sector as a whole grew its aggregate productivity by a massive 19%.
19% overall.
Yes. And in specific sectors, the numbers are just explosive. The chemical industry saw its aggregate productivity violently surge by 43%.
Wow.
The glass industry jumped 33%.
Yeah.
Food processing went up 18%.
Okay, I need to play devil's advocate here,
Mm-hmm.
because if you just present those two sets of facts side by side to a layperson, it sounds mathematically impossible.
It does sound like a contradiction.
How does an economy lose a third of its factories, fire a quarter of its workers, and simultaneously produce exponentially better results? I mean, a 43% surge in chemicals. That doesn't add up on the surface.
Right.
Unless there is a hidden variable, a mechanical shift that earlier economists simply weren't capturing.
Exactly. And to solve the mystery of this skyrocketing productivity, we have to look at the massive mistakes previous economists were making when they studied these kinds of economic
So
shocks.
they were looking at the wrong spreadsheet.
They really were. Before Pavcnik published this work, economists trying to measure productivity changes were relying on standard academic models that suffered from two massive critical blind spots: selection bias and simultaneity bias.
Okay, we need to break those two biases down thoroughly because this is where the paper transitions from a history lesson into a masterclass on how to actually measure reality.
It's the core of her genius, really.
Let's start with the big one, selection bias. In the context of a shifting economy, what were previous researchers doing wrong?
In the simplest possible terms, previous economists were only looking at the survivors.
Okay.
Their statistical models effectively said, let's take a snapshot of all the factories operating in 1979. Then, let's fast forward to 1986, take another snapshot of those exact same surviving factories, and measure how much better they got at their jobs.
Wait. If they only measure the factories that existed in both 1979 and 1986, they are completely ignoring the 35% of factories that died in the middle.
Precisely. They took the data of the dead and they just threw it out the window.
That is a staggering oversight.
It's massive.
Let's map that to something relatable for the listener.
Yeah.
Imagine you are evaluating a new, highly intense physical fitness program. You weigh 100 people on day one.
Right.
A year later, you weigh the 20 people who actually stuck with the program, and you completely ignore the 80 people who quit or got injured. You'd look at the 20 survivors, see they lost 50 pounds each, and publish a paper saying, this program is a 100% success. Everyone loses 50 pounds.
Exactly. It's a total distortion of reality.
And the danger of that distortion in economics must be profound.
Oh, it is. If you calculate the average test scores of a classroom, and halfway through the year you just expel the bottom 35% of the students, the ones failing every test,
Right.
of course the class average goes up at the end of the year.
But wait, if that's true, doesn't that undermine the whole productivity skyrocketed narrative? Is this whole thing just a cheap math trick? Did the Chilean factories not actually get better, but rather the average just mathematically looks better because the losers were erased from the denominator?
That is the exact question Pavcnik wanted to answer, and it's why she utilized a new, highly complex semi-parametric method building on the foundational work of economists Stephen Ollie and Ariel Pakes.
Okay, no jargon. What did she actually do?
What she did differently was explicitly incorporate the data of the plant exits into her estimation. She didn't ignore the 35% that died. She mathematically autopsied them. She wanted to know who died and why.
So she tracked the ghosts. What did she find when she looked at the dead companies?
She found empirical proof that death in a free market is not random.
Not random.
Not at all. The data revealed that the factories that eventually went bankrupt were, on average, a full 8% less productive than the factories that survived, even before the tariffs were dropped.
Okay, 8% might not sound like a lot to someone outside of manufacturing, but in a world of tight margins, an 8% efficiency gap is massive.
It is the difference between life and death.
Right.
If your competitor can produce the exact same glass bottle 8% faster, or with 8% less material waste over the course of a few years, they will completely price you out of the market. What this data proved was that the 100% tariffs were acting as a life support system.
Wow.
They were keeping brain-dead zombie factories alive.
So the selection bias wasn't a trick. It was hiding the truth of the detox.
Yes.
Pulling the plug on the tariffs wasn't some random tragedy that struck good and bad businesses equally. It was a mandatory evolutionary filter.
That's a great way to put it.
The system wasn't failing. It was forcefully expelling its most toxic, inefficient elements.
Exactly. When an 8% less efficient factory is allowed to die, it stops consuming raw materials. It stops hoarding labor that could be used elsewhere. It stops taking up capital and bank loans that it is simply wasting. The exit of the inefficient is a strict prerequisite for aggregate growth.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. You have to prune the diseased branches so the tree can survive.
Precisely.
But what about that second bias you mentioned? Simultaneity bias. What is that and how does it warp the data?
Simultaneity bias is a bit more nuanced, but equally important. It happens because a plant manager on the ground knows things that the economist looking at a spreadsheet years later simply does not.
Okay, paint a picture for me. How does that disconnect happen?
Imagine you run a commercial bakery. One week, your lead baker figures out a brilliant new way to organize the prep stations, and suddenly your kitchen is 20% faster.
Awesome. Love a good bakery.
Right. You're experiencing an unobserved productivity shock. You just got better at your job. Because you know you can now handle more volume, you immediately go out and buy a second industrial oven and hire 2 more workers.
Makes sense. I'm scaling up because I figured out how to be more efficient internally.
Right. But now imagine an economist looks at your bakery's data 5 years later. They can't see the specific week your baker had that brilliant idea.
Right. That's not on the tax return.
Exactly. All they see on the spreadsheet is year 3, bakery bought a new oven and hired 2 people. Year 4, output increased by 20%.
Ah. So the economist looks at the timeline and assumes the new oven caused the productivity increase.
Exactly. They get the causality completely backward. They think capital investment creates efficiency. But in reality, the efficiency came first, and the investment was a simultaneous reaction to it.
That's fascinating.
If economists don't correct for this, they end up overvaluing the impact of raw materials and machinery, and they massively undervalue the invisible internal improvements a company makes.
So how on earth do you correct for something you can't see? If the brilliant idea isn't on the spreadsheet, how did Pavcnik measure it?
By using the unpacks methodology, she essentially used the plant's investment decisions as a proxy to trace those invisible productivity shocks.
Okay.
The math is incredibly dense, but essentially, by looking at how a plant adjusts its capital and investments in real time, the model can untangle what was a genuine internal efficiency gain versus what was just the result of buying more machines. She isolated the true productivity growth from the noise.
Which means her numbers are ironclad. When she says the chemical sector grew by 43%, she has accounted for the dead companies and she has accounted for the new machines. That growth is real foundational efficiency.
Absolutely real.
But here's where my math alarm goes off again.
Hit me.
Even if you expel the bottom 35% of the class, that simply mathematically does not explain a 43% surge in an industry. The math doesn't work unless the survivors themselves fundamentally altered their behavior.
And they did. They were profoundly altered by the trauma of the changing market. Let's focus specifically on the plants that survived in those import-competing sectors, the domestic manufacturers who suddenly found themselves in the ring with global giants.
Right.
They didn't just coast by. Pavcnik's data shows that these specific survivors were forced to grow their productivity by 3% to 10% more every single year compared to plants in safe, non-traded sectors like local services.
3 to 10% extra growth compounded annually over 7 years. That is astronomical growth for a mature manufacturing facility.
It is, and we have to ask why they did it. It wasn't because they, read a great management book. It was because the knife was at their throats.
A literal knife to the throat.
With cheap foreign goods suddenly flooding the market, they couldn't just have a leisurely board meeting about 5-year efficiency goals. They had to miraculously trim the fat, fire useless management layers, negotiate better prices with suppliers, and innovate immediately, or they would be the very next ones to die.
It's the ultimate forcing function. I like to think of this as the survivor's burden. It wasn't luck that kept them alive. It was sheer, panic-driven self-improvement.
Panic is a great motivator.
Truly. They were standing on the edge of the abyss, looking down at the 35% of their peers who had just been vaporized. And they realized, if we don't become the absolute best in the world at what we do right now, we are next. It's evolution at knife point.
And that desperation breeds incredible operational discipline. They adopted better technology, yes, but they also ruthlessly eliminated what economists call X-inefficiencies.
X-inefficiencies. That sounds like a sci-fi term.
Oh.
What is an X-inefficiency in the real world?
It's basically a polite academic term for organizational laziness and bloat.
Oh, I know that well.
We all do.
Yeah.
Think of a company that holds 3 redundant meetings every week just to plan another meeting. Think of a factory where the layout is terrible, so workers spend 20 minutes a day just walking across the floor to get a tool. When profit margins are artificially high because of a tariff, management ignores these X-inefficiencies. They're annoying, but they don't threaten the survival of the business. But when margins drop to 0...
Those 20 minutes of wasted walking are suddenly the difference between making payroll and closing the doors.
So they fix it overnight.
That makes total sense. They squeeze every drop of water out of the towel. But this raises a massive question about the companies that were already doing great.
Okay, where are you going with this?
Because Chile didn't just have lazy domestic factories. They had some world-class exporters, right?
Mm.
Companies that were already selling their goods to the global market long before the tariffs dropped.
Yeah.
I assume these global champions just exploded with growth when the economy fully opened up.
This brings us to another massive, highly counterintuitive shock in the data. The global champions, the export-oriented industries selling Chilean goods to the world, got almost nothing out of this massive trade liberalization.
Wait, really?
Their productivity growth lines stayed almost completely flat during this entire 7-year period.
Wait, I need to stop you there. The export companies, the ones you would logically think would thrive the absolute most under a banner of free trade, saw zero extra productivity boost. Why? If the domestic guys are growing 10% a year, why are the exporters flatlining?
Because you have to think about the environment they evolved in. To be an exporter in a heavily taxed, isolated country with massive tariffs, you already had to be an apex predator.
Oh, because everything was stacked against them.
Exactly. Think about the hurdles they faced before 1974. They had to navigate terrible domestic logistics. If they needed to import a specialized machine to make their product, they had to pay that 100% tariff.
What?
And despite all those domestic penalties, they still had to sell their final product on the hyper-competitive global market at a price that could beat an American or German company.
So they were basically running a marathon with 50-pound weights strapped to their ankles, and they were still winning.
Exactly. To survive in that hostile environment, they were already operating at absolute peak human efficiency. They were the ultimate involution kings. There were no redundant meetings. There were no poorly laid out factory floors. There was simply no more fat left to trim.
That's wild.
So when the domestic market liberalized and the tariffs dropped, the exporters just shrugged. They were already as lean as a company could possibly be.
The analogy that jumps to mind is comparing an Olympic sprinter to someone who sits on the couch eating potato chips all day.
I like this.
The exporters are the Olympic sprinters. They are training 6 hours a day. Their diet is perfectly calibrated. If you tell an Olympic sprinter they need to run faster, they might train for another year and shave 0.01 seconds off their time. They were biologically maxed out.
Right.
But the import-competing domestic plants, they are the couch potatoes living comfortably inside that artificial oxygen tent.
Suddenly you drop a hungry, angry bear into the tent with them.
A very angry bear. Of course, the couch potatoes saw a massive leap in their fitness metrics. They had to go from a resting heart rate to a full sprint instantly just to avoid being eaten.
That is a very visceral way to put it, but mechanically, it is perfectly accurate. The exporters had no fat to lose. The protected domestic producers had nothing but fat.
Okay, but we have a math problem here again. And this is why we have to dig deep into the numbers.
Let's do it.
If the exporters didn't grow at all, and the surviving domestic plants grew an extra 3 to 10% a year, where did the massive 19% total aggregate productivity growth for the entire sector come from? Or that 43% in chemicals? If the individual surviving companies are only growing a little bit and the champions aren't growing at all, what is driving the massive aggregate leap?
Welcome to the dark, hidden engine of economic growth. Pavcnik broke down that 19% total aggregate productivity growth over the 7 years into its component parts. She found that only a fraction of that total growth, about 6.6%, came from factories actually getting better internally.
Only 6.6%.
Yes. The within-plant improvements, the trimming of the fat, the new machines, that only accounted for about a third of the overall growth.
So where did the vast majority of the growth come from?
A massive 12.7% of the growth, the lion's share, came from a statistical term she calls covariance.
Covariance. That sounds so polite, so academic. What does covariance actually mean on the factory floor?
The more descriptive economic term is resource reallocation.
Which still sounds like a PowerPoint slide.
Right.
What does it actually look like when resources are reallocated?
Let's use the tree pruning metaphor we discussed earlier.
Right.
When those 35% of inefficient factories went bankrupt, they didn't just vanish into the ether.
Right, they leave things behind.
Exactly. Their physical and abstract assets remained. Their market share, their customers, their physical factory equipment, their real estate, their bank credit lines, and their most talented workers were all suddenly released back into the wild. And who absorbed them?
The highly efficient survivors.
The highly efficient survivors.
Oh, wow. So when the zombie tractor plant dies, the hyper-efficient domestic tractor plant swoops in, They go to the bankruptcy auction and buy the zombies' heavy machinery for pennies on the dollar.
Yes.
The local bank, which used to waste its lending capital keeping the zombie afloat, suddenly has millions of dollars freed up, and they loan it to the efficient plant to help them expand.
Exactly. The top-performing engineers and floor managers who were frustrated working at the failing company are suddenly looking for jobs, and the efficient company hires them. The customers who are buying the terrible $30,000 tractor now have to look elsewhere, and the efficient company captures that market share.
It's the ultimate transfer of wealth and energy. It's systemic cannibalization.
It really is.
The system doesn't grow because everyone holds hands, seems kumbaya, and collectively works 5% harder.
Yeah.
It grows by viciously stripping wealth, customers, and resources away from the inefficient losers and feeding them directly into the mouths of the hyper-efficient winners. The strong consume the remnants of the weak, and the overall organism gets incredibly muscular.
That is the biological law of capitalism. And if we connect this to why economic systems must allow for failure, without factory death, capital is locked up.
Right.
Imagine a zombie factory in a protected economy. It's barely surviving, but it's tying up 100 workers, $10 million in bank loans, and a huge physical footprint of land. As long as that factory is kept alive by government protection, those specific workers, that specific money, and that specific land cannot be used by a brilliant new startup that could be twice as productive.
It's a dead end.
By letting the zombie die, you release those trapped resources back into the ecosystem so the strong can use them.
It is brutal. It feels ruthless. But when you look at it through the lens of resource reallocation, preventing a bad company from going bankrupt is actually stealing the future from a better company. You are literally starving the innovative companies to keep the dying ones on life support.
Which is exactly why Pavcnik's detailed breakdown of that covariance number is arguably the most important contribution of the entire paper. It provides empirical proof that the death of bad companies isn't an unfortunate side effect of economic growth. It is the core engine of growth. Without exit, there is no reallocation. Without reallocation, the economy stagnates.
So hold on. I need to put my skeptic hat back on, and I'm going to push back hard here.
Bring it on.
Because in academia, whenever someone drops a paper this revolutionary, the knives come out. Other economists must have tried to tear this methodology apart. What if this entire narrative of survival of the fittest is just an illusion?
Okay.
I know the early 1980s was a period of wild macroeconomic swings across Latin America. What if this wasn't about tariffs and efficiency at all? What if it was just some weird glitch in the currency markets?
You're right to ask that, and Pavcnik knew that critique was coming. She dedicated a significant portion of her research to defending against exactly that argument. In the literature, this is often called the Great Alibi.
The Great Alibi.
Yes. The biggest, loudest pushback she received was about exchange rates. Because right in the middle of this study, between 1980 and 1981, Chile's real exchange rate appreciated significantly.
Break that down to the listener. What does a real exchange rate appreciation mean in practical terms for a business or a consumer in Chile?
It means the Chilean peso became much stronger relative to other global currencies, particularly the US dollar. When your currency is strong, foreign goods become even cheaper, but more importantly, citizens feel wealthier. Their purchasing power increases. So critics of Pavcnik's paper argued that this currency appreciation caused domestic demand to artificially spike. People suddenly had more buying power, so they went on a buying spree.
Okay, I see the argument. The critics are saying, look, these factories didn't actually get more efficient. They didn't trim the fat or eliminate X inefficiencies. They just experienced a massive temporary demand pump. People were just buying everything in sight.
Yes. The critics argued that the factories didn't actually produce more goods per worker. They just sold off all the old, unsold junk that had been sitting idle in their warehouses for years. If you sell a massive backlog of inventory in 1 year, your spreadsheet looks like you had an incredible surge in productivity, but in reality, you just emptied the closet. It's a fake boom.
That is a very compelling counterargument.
Yeah.
If the numbers are just an illusion created by emptying the warehouses, then the whole theory of trade liberalization driving efficiency falls apart.
So how did Pavcnik defend her work against this? Because this paper stands as a monument today, she must have systematically crushed this alibi.
She destroyed it by looking directly into the closets.
I love that.
She looked at the warehouse inventories. It's a brilliant piece of deductive reasoning. If the critics were right, if the productivity boom was purely the result of people buying up old stock due to a strong currency, then warehouse inventory levels across the country should have plummeted during those specific years. Right. If I'm faking my massive sales numbers by selling all the old patio furniture I stored in my garage over the last 3 years, eventually the garage is empty. My inventory goes to zero.
Exactly. But Pavcnik pulled the data on inventory holdings. And the data coldly shows that inventory levels remained a totally flat, dead straight line.
Flat.
For the entire 7-year period across the shocks and the currency appreciations, inventories hovered steadily around 9% of total output. They didn't plummet in 1981. They didn't fluctuate with the exchange rate.
Boom. The warehouses were just as full as they were before, but output per worker was genuinely skyrocketing. That is ironclad proof. You can't argue with the physical boxes on the shelves.
You really can't.
It wasn't a fake demand pump. It wasn't a currency glitch. It was real, undeniable muscle growth. The plants were genuinely producing more value with fewer resources.
It completely strips away the excuses. And once you strip away the exchange rate argument, and you account for the dead companies, and you account for the machinery investments, you are left with the ultimate, indisputable mathematical conclusion of the study.
Lay it on me.
To finalize her point, Pavcnik ran a regression analysis. It's a complex statistical model designed to see exactly how two variables move in relation to one another over time. She isolated the relationship between plant productivity and the specific tariff levels protecting their sector.
The absolute moment of truth. After all the noise is filtered out, what was the correlation?
There is an extremely significant, undeniable negative correlation between tariff levels and plant productivity.
Let me make sure I'm translating that correctly for the listener. A negative correlation means that as one variable goes up, the other strictly goes down. So the higher the tariff wall you build to protect your domestic industry, the lower the productivity drops.
Yes.
The thicker the armor you put on the soldier, the weaker the soldier inside actually becomes.
That is precisely what the math dictates. The higher the wall, the weaker, lazier, and more fragile the industry becomes. And conversely, the sectors with the highest import penetration, meaning the industries that face the absolute most brutal, unshielded foreign threat, became the most robust, highly productive sectors in the entire country.
It is the ultimate paradox of safety. We think we are doing the right thing by protecting our own, but the only true safety comes from exposure to danger. A protective wall is just a greenhouse for mediocrity.
If we connect this to the broader trajectory of global economics, this paper provides the empirical proof for Joseph Schumpeter's famous concept of creative destruction.
Creative destruction.
Yes, Schumpeter argued that the continuous mutation of the economic system, constantly destroying the old one, constantly creating a new one, is the essential fact of capitalism. By trying to protect jobs today with tariffs, subsidies, and artificial walls, a government is mathematically guaranteeing the systemic rot of the entire economy tomorrow.
Right, because you're freezing time.
Exactly. And we've seen this play out in other parts of the world. Look at Japan's lost decades, who lost 30 years. A huge part of that stagnation was because their banking system kept zombie enterprises alive on life support, refusing to let them fail. They blocked the creative destruction.
Wow.
You might save a specific job at a specific factory today, but you are ensuring that the entire industry will eventually collapse because it will be entirely outpaced by the innovation happening in the rest of the world.
Okay, let's do a comprehensive recap of the journey we just went on because the mechanics here are so vital. We started in an artificial oxygen tent, an economy suffocating under 100% tariffs, rewarding bloated, lazy companies.
Right.
The government abruptly rips the tent away, smashing tariffs down to 10%. We witness a localized catastrophe, a massive extinction event where 35% of factories go bankrupt and 25% of workers lose their jobs.
A total shock to the system.
But then we look beneath the surface. We see the survivors forced into hyper-evolution, growing 3 to 10% faster every single year with the knife of foreign competition at their throats.
Yes.
And finally, we uncovered the ultimate hidden driver of aggregate growth, the strong absorbing the weak. A massive reallocation of resources, capital, labor, and market share flows from the dying zombies to the highly efficient winners, driving an incredible 19% surge in overall productivity. This isn't just a history lesson about 1980s Chilean policy, it is the biological law of economics.
And it is a law that applies far beyond international trade agreements. It applies to any system, corporate, political, or personal, that tries to shield itself from reality and competition.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave you with. I want you to turn the lens away from macroeconomic data and turn it directly onto your own life.
A little uncomfortable, but necessary.
Look at your own career, your own skill set, your own industry. Right now, there's almost certainly some invisible tariff, some institutional wall protecting you from direct, absolute competition.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's an expensive university degree that acts as a gatekeeper. Maybe it's a rigid corporate hierarchy that protects seniority over output. Or maybe it's just a geographical advantage you happen to live near the office.
Right, those are all walls.
History and the rigorous mathematics of this study prove that every artificial wall eventually falls. Today, we are staring down the barrel of technological shifts that make the Chilean trade liberalization look like a minor speed bump.
Without a doubt.
Artificial intelligence, global remote work, automation, these are the great indiscriminate wrecking balls of our time. They are going to obliterate the artificial protections we've built around our knowledge work. When that digital wall falls and the floodgates of total global competition open, what happens to you?
That is the question.
Will you be part of the 35% that relied on the oxygen tent and slowly turns to dust? Or will you recognize the detox for what it is, trim your own inefficiencies, and use the panic to evolve? Think about it.